Good evening and welcome to Nashville. I'm Alan Jackson. There's a basic economic truth that every generation has to learn. Prosperity comes from people going to work, businesses producing something of value, and workers developing the skills needed to keep an economy moving. That's why some of the trends we're seeing in America deserve more attention. There are around 7 million able-bodied working-aged men who are no longer even looking for work, while employers across the country are struggling to fill good-paying positions. For instance, there are 400,000 open jobs in construction that are unfilled. There are twice that many in the defense industrial base. Ford Motors has said it has struggled to fill thousands of mechanic jobs paying roughly $120,000 a year. So the issue is becoming larger than whether America has enough jobs. The deeper question is whether we still have enough people willing to do the work, and whether our culture still places the same value on work. At the same time, socialism is finding a new audience, especially among younger Americans who have little firsthand memory of where those ideas have led in the past. New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani is now offering a very public test of that philosophy through taxpayer-supported grocery stores, rent freezes, higher taxes, and a broader government role in deciding what things should cost and who should pay for them. Well, the promises are easy to understand because they sound compassionate. Cheaper groceries, lower rent, and more help from the government. But the economic reality does not disappear simply because the price is controlled. Somebody still pays the difference. Well, that leads to a much larger question. What happens when a society becomes more focused on dividing wealth than creating it? What happens when dependence grows while individual responsibility weakens? I read an article recently that connected with what we're seeing in our culture. The author phrased it as the loss of shame in our culture. There was a time in American culture when the biblical worldview was more intact, and there were some behaviors that were not recognized as ideal. Simple things. There was a higher value placed upon work, and it was seen as an expression of faith, as a way of honoring God. God works in our lives, and we worked. We understood that employment would improve your status and standing, no matter what the nature of that employment. Well, unfortunately, that isn't true any longer. In fact, the culture celebrates less work and less effort. We have more young adults living with their parents to a later point in their lives. The government used to provide a safety net. If you had a tragedy or a tragic occurrence, there was a safety net. It wasn't something to consider as necessary. Well, the author of the article went on to say that now we've arrived at a point where the government provision is expected and anticipated. There's no shame in it. And the culture is becoming quite happy for the government to accept responsibility for our health care, for our education, and anything else that we can get them to provide, which makes the socialist argument far more acceptable. Perhaps it explains what we're seeing emerge in New York City. It's the largest city in America and the financial capital of the world. New York Democratic Socialist Mayor Zohran Mamdani's new housing agenda, it sparked some controversy. He recently unveiled his plan to strip properties from landlords that he deemed bad, and he vowed to use city resources, taxpayer dollars, to help remove owners. Mamdani's self-appointed Rent Guidelines Board also voted in June to freeze rents on 1- and 2-year leases for rent-stabilized apartments. Rent-stabilized apartments in New York City are government-regulated private housing units with capped annual rent increases and strong anti-eviction protections. They make up nearly half of the city's rental supply. It's estimated that 60,000 apartments have been pulled from the market because landlords can't recover renovation costs under the current regulations. Owners feel the threat that when their buildings fall into disrepair because of Mamdani's policies, Mamdani will illegally take private buildings from the mom and pop and multi-generational owners and convert them into socialized housing. In another socialist move, Mamdani rushed the rollout of a tax on people who have a secondary residence within the city. What made it worse is city officials published a searchable database identifying property owners by name and the addresses of those who could possibly subjected to the city's proposed tax, exposing these homeowners to harassment and public safety risks. It's a bullying tactic driven by the socialist ideal of taxing the rich. As Mamdani put it, the best city in the world deserves the best parks, libraries, and schools in the world. And that's only possible when we all pay our fair share. But the reality is high-income Americans already pay a disproportionately large portion of federal income taxes. The top 10% of taxpayers already pay more than 70% of America's federal individual income taxes. The top half of taxpayers pay nearly 97% of the federal individual income tax. The bottom half, they pay roughly 3%. Well, in this season, we can't readily accept every narrative dispensed by elected officials in the media. We shouldn't spend time trying to figure out more ways we can game the system to get more free stuff from the government. As the people who adhere to a biblical worldview, let's hold to the high ground. We have an assignment to stand for the truth, to search for it, because the solution to society's ills, it's not political, it's spiritual. Well, in a moment, we'll hear from the former director of the Congressional Budget Office, Doug Holtz-Eakin. He's now the president of the American Action Forum. I'll be right back. Tonight, we're joined by the president of the American Action Forum, Doug Holtz-Eakin. Welcome to the show, Doug.
Thanks for having me.
We're less than 3 months away from the midterms, and people are going to be thinking about their personal financial situation as they head to the polls. Maybe we can start by you giving us your perspective on the current state of the economy.
Well, I think we all know the inflation story. Inflation remains above the Federal Reserve's preferred 2% target. It's running at something like 3.5%. We'll get another reading on it Wednesday morning at 8:30, and maybe it'll come down some. But I think that's a sore point in the economy for almost everybody. A lot of work to be done on that front. The rest really in the hands of the outcome of the war with Iran and the future of global oil prices. U.S. economy's really weathered it quite well, much better than I think most people thought. We got pretty good growth in the second quarter as a result. Household sector seemed to recover. So if you do the checklist of sort of things that you'd like to see, strong business investments, strong consumer spending, we got those in the second quarter. Now, are there reasons to be nervous? Yeah, I'd say a little bit, but mostly it has to do with the outcome of the war. How do those hostilities end?
You know, it's confusing to interpret the information we hear. Recent reports have said that household spending is robust and consumer confidence is high, and yet we hear the consistent reports that people can't afford groceries or gas or housing. How do we reconcile those two things?
I reconcile them every month because we get a report from the Department of Commerce called Personal Income and Outlays. And you look at the outlays, they're spending the money, and it's more and more money because food prices are up, gasoline prices are up. That money has to go out the door. The income's just barely keeping up with inflation. That's the growth in wages. And how do you bridge the gap? You stop saving. And we've seen the U.S. saving rate go down every month this year. And I think households feel stressed because they know they're not putting money away that they'd like to have for a rainy day or for college or for retirement. And you don't feel good when you're not doing that. So I think the discontent's real, even though they're managing to get from one paycheck to the next.
Well, we've recently had a jobs report, and the numbers were lower than expected. Help us interpret that, and what are the implications for the workforce?
Well, for a while now, I felt that the two numbers that get talked about the most in a jobs report, unemployment rate and number of jobs created, are the least important number in a jobs report. In this day and age, as it turns out, the most important number is how fast are wages rising, and are they rising faster than inflation? And the answer, once again, was no. It's about a tie. So no one's getting ahead. The unemployment rate's 4.1%. That's good news. A lot of people going to work, but they're not getting ahead by working hard. And that's the troubling part of those jobs reports. We did get the negative number you heard so much about. The report said we lost 40,000 jobs in local government, largely education. That looks like some sort of anomaly on the end of school where they had the teachers going out later than they thought. So we'll see what it looks like in the next report and clean that up. I think that's more sampling error than real.
Are the attempts to kind of downsize a bloated government workforce, is that feeding some of those job numbers as well?
We saw that over the past year with the federal government. The top line numbers went down considerably, and there's been a lot of downsizing in the federal government. I don't think there was a conscious effort to downsize local schools. So that just looks like an odd little data quirk.
I've read some stories and heard some discussions about the large numbers of working age men in the system that are just not looking for jobs anymore. They've kind of stepped out of the marketplace. Is that is that typical? Is there something unusual in this season?
It's disturbing. The labor force participation rate's now 61.4%. It's a number that's similar to 2005-06. We haven't seen this in 20 years. And we've seen about 1 million people stop looking for work and just leave trying over the past couple of months. Those are not good numbers, and they're ones that I'm quite concerned about. It does seem to be concentrated in older workers. If you focus on 25 to 54-year-olds, they're still looking for work. They're still largely employed, and that's the good news story in the labor market. But there's some pieces at the edges that are really in trouble.
Well, artificial intelligence continues to occupy a lot of the ink and a lot of the discussions. They tell us it's going to reshape the workforce. Is that imminent? Is that a long-term view? Is it something we should be concerned about? Put that in some kind of context for us.
So the way it works in these stories is that, you look at a worker and you say, what are your tasks? And it might involve some filing. It might be answering the phone. You have a whole list of things that are part of the job description. Then you ask, can an AI do that? And if the answer is the AI can do 70 or 80% of those, then we're going to replace that person with an AI. That's the story that gets told. In that story, the amount of work that gets done doesn't change, but the number of people doing it goes down by 1. And so what you should see is a big jump in productivity because we're getting all the work done with very few workers. We're not seeing that. In fact, the productivity numbers, which are solid but not spectacular, went down in the past couple of quarters, not up. And so there's no real widespread evidence that AI is reshaping the daily lives of American workers. Not yet. That may be something in the future, but certainly not here now. What we have seen is all the stuff that will produce AI. We've seen construction and electricity generation and data servers and server farms and, all of the things that you've heard so much about in the building of the data centers. That's the piece where AI has impacted the economy the most. And it's produced a lot of business investment, but it hasn't really dented the jobs too much yet.
Well, Doug, we need to take a short break. I hope you can stay with us for another segment.
Absolutely.
And for those of you watching, if you got a phone nearby, try logging on to ajnow.com. Send me an email. We'd love to hear your thoughts on these topics. I'll be right back. We're back now with the president of the American Action Forum, Doug Holtz-Eakin. Doug, the Iran war seems to have cast a shadow over our economy for as long as we can remember at the moment. Cost of oil has stayed in the 70s, which is a pretty reasonable number, but the price at the pumps hasn't really come down or adjusted appropriately. What do you see longer term coming out of that conflict, and how is it going to affect our economy?
Well, I think the real concern remains the global oil market. The prices haven't gone to the numbers like 150, which we heard bandied about early in the conflict, but there's still real disruption of the oil through the strait, and that means that inventories on the ground around the world are really stretched. The U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve is at its lowest level since the 80s, and all of that means there are very thin margins, and you could see real price pressures if there's some adverse turn on the oil market. If things go well and that loosens up, then it all comes down, but it doesn't come down real fast. Those inventories have to be replenished. They won't all show up as final sales real quickly. So I see, much more of the same for oil prices, gasoline prices, and the like over the next couple of months. I don't see a sharp move one way or another.
All right. New York Mayor Zohran Mamdani is very gracious to provide sound bites for us. It's almost believable what he has to say. Watch this one, and then I've got a question.
City government is stepping in to make people's lives more affordable. Today, I am proud to announce a collection of essential staples that will be predictably 30% cheaper at all 5 of our city-run grocery stores. Here's how it will work. Once a month, our 5 city-run grocery stores will set prices for this core set of goods at 30% below typical retail prices. No exceptions, no gimmicks.
All right, the Democratic Socialist of America continue to gain ground and traction. You're an economist. Help us understand a bit about what they're proposing and what the reality of that will become.
Well, let's go back to food prices 30% lower. There are a lot of ways to do that, right? You could give people a 30% tax credit to help buy food, and then they take 30% off the price, and that would subsidize food, and everyone would buy more food, and food would get more expensive, and it would backfire. And we've seen the left do that again and again and again on all fronts for a while now. Or you could try to do the same thing by, instead of giving the money to the people, stick it in some sort of government building program to build supermarkets, stock them, and do all the logistics around them. Do you really think that's going to be cheaper than just giving people the money? I don't think so. So that 30% is going to just mean bigger taxes somewhere. And all this is a shell game. We're going to get the money off rich people somehow, whether it's pied-à-terre tax or something else, and try to get it to someone else. That's all fine until you run out of other people's money. And people are going to leave New York City, and he's going to have a problem. This doesn't end well. All of these tricks have been tried before. They got their fancy new packaging, fancy new labels, but it's not going to work.
You know, I'm certainly not a professional economist, but the principles around socialism and communism have been practiced and demonstrated, and the outcomes observable. How is it that academia and so many economic voices are not speaking up to tell us the obvious outcome of this foolishness?
I can't answer that. I don't know. I'm as saddened, I think, as anyone. You know, I grew up with the Soviet Union. I grew up with Ronald Reagan breaking the back of the Soviet Union. We saw all of the things people are saying today tried in some form in the U.S. and on a large scale in the Soviet Union, and all of those things failed. And so now we have a collective absence of memory, and we're going to try it again. It doesn't make any sense to me. And it'd be fine if it was an academic exercise, but it's not. These are real people in their lives, and there'll be a lot of pain and suffering that we could avoid.
Well, it seems to me that Mamdani's rent freezes and property confiscations are going to have long-term consequences for New York's real estate. And those aren't all big investors. Many of those are just normal people that have spent their whole lives sacrificing to own real estate.
The typical apartment owner in the United States is a mom and pop operation with 5 to 6 units. It's not these enormous sky rises that you hear so much about, and they're going to be hurt badly by this. And it's been done before. You roll the clock back 50 years in New York City with rent controls. You know, it took almost 50 years to recover from that, and we're going to do it again. It doesn't make any sense at all.
Well, I've got one more question. The Wall Street Journal reports that Trump has called Fed Chair Wash repeatedly since he became the Fed chair. What's your take on the relationship and what's coming?
I don't know what's coming. I think it's not all that shocking for a president to talk to a Fed chair. I think the recent Fed chairs, Mr. Powell and Bernanke, really didn't talk too much to the president, but predecessors did. Alan Greenspan did, no question about it. Arthur Burns did. So we've seen this, and it is in and of itself not damaging or shocking. But, you know, I think the most important thing is, how does Kevin Warsh do the job? And, you know, he's going to prove his worth by the decisions he makes, not who he talks to on the phone. And that's what we ought to be watching and taking account of.
Well, Doug, I really appreciate your time today. Your insight is always helpful.
Well, thank you.
We'll be back in a moment with your emails. Thank you for spending a few minutes of your day with us. Just a reminder, if you ever miss a live episode, you can always go to ajnow.com. There is a full archive there of all the programs. You can watch them at your leisure. Choose your favorites. They're easy to share with a friend. And thank you for your emails. Your thoughts and comments are always a highlight. Kristen from Pennsylvania wrote, Tim Graham reports clearly understood, authentic truth. We need to hear this truth to be well informed on current events and to be well informed so we can cast our votes in the coming November elections. I'm grateful you're sharing your platform for telling bold truth with authenticity. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Kristen. You know, I think sometimes we labor under the misconception that ignorance will protect us, and that's a serious mistake. Ignorance does not protect us from consequences. If the gas gauge in your car is broken, that won't keep you from running out of gas. We've got to pay attention. We have to understand what's happening, and we have to take our place. Al from Texas wrote, in addition to being the highest paid federal employee during his tenure in D.C., does Dr. Fauci also hold the record for invoking the Fifth Amendment 111 times in a single hearing? Hopefully, there will not be a cash reward for that stellar accomplishment. As always, thanks for holding forth the truth. God bless. Dr. Fauci's diary and the texts that were revealed from his phone are a very troubling insight into a powerful leader overseeing our national health. His lack of concern for the public welfare and public good is deeply disturbing. We need to pray for those bureaucrats that have authority over our lives. We need people who fear God. Marcia M. from Virginia, please advise listeners to remove deceased family names from voting rolls and call back in order to ensure their names were removed. States are supposed to be notified by Social Security. In my experience, the Republicans were conforming to the rules while I had trouble and aggravation doing so for my parent that voted Democrat. I had no problem with my mother's removal. She voted Republican. My father, who voted as a Democrat, was a tedious task to finally get his name removed. It took 3 calls. Well, the Democrat and a Republican at the kitchen table, I bet you had some lively dinner discussions. The truth is, election integrity is all of our responsibilities. We all have to pay attention. We all have to do what we know is right. Register to vote. Encourage your friends to do so. Let's participate in the process, folks. It makes a difference. God's moving in the earth. Let's decide to join him in that. God bless you, and have a good evening.